History is full of legendary conmen, bold, brilliant, and sometimes downright insane. But none were as audacious as the man who saved the Eiffel Tower, Victor Lustig. He didn't just con the rich, he played them. He printed his own money, swindled Al Capone, and built an empire of deception so brilliant it seemed untouchable. But in the end, it wasn't the victims of his scorn that brought his downfall. It was the betrayal of a woman. The early 1920s was a rather eventful decade for Paris, the city of love. The Roaring Twenties, as it came to be known, bettered the rise of jazz, Coco Chanel, and the Eiffel Tower debacle of 1925. You see, most of Europe was still recovering from World War I and the economic collapse that followed. By 1925, the Eiffel Tower, originally built as a temporary structure for the 1889 World's Fair, faced growing criticism in the early 1920s. Maintenance costs were skyrocketing, and there were rumors that it might be dismantled. Well, thank God it wasn't. Otherwise, where would honeymooning lovers of the 21st century take those beautiful swirling pictures that light up our Instagram feeds? In the middle of the public discourse around the Eiffel Tower rose a man named Victor Lustig, who decided to take matters into his own hands and sell the gigantic metal monument once and for all. Yep, you heard that right. Before we go into the details of this scam, who is Victor Lustig? They say the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. But for Victor Lustig, he was no mere trickster. He was an illusion, a ghost drifting through high society, vanishing with money and dignity. Victor Lustig entered the world in 1890, born to a poor family in Lustig in Austria-Hungary, now the Czech Republic, a town so small that most maps barely acknowledged it. But unlike other children, Lustig wasn't a boy of small ambitions. He was quick, far too quick for a boy his age. He learned languages effortlessly, charmed his elders with honeyed words, and by his teenage years, he had mastered French, German, English, Italian, and Czech. While others dreamed of steady jobs in mothers' homes, Lustig dreamed of something else. Power. Not through violence, not through brute force, but through perception. He understood something most men never do. Power isn't something you are. It's about who people believe you to be. By his 20s, he was drifting across Europe's grand casinos, blending in with aristocrats and businessmen, learning their weaknesses, their desires, and most importantly, their greed. He never needed to steal. He simply let men hand him their fortunes, believing they had outwitted him. But petty cons wasn't enough. He wanted something greater. So, how did this budding conman land his biggest scam, which eventually became one of the most storied con jobs of the 20th century? It started with a newspaper article, just a small piece, buried among the stories of politics and fashion. This article spoke of a growing problem, the Eiffel Tower. Once the marvel of France was rusting away. Maintenance was expensive, and some whispered that it might be turned down entirely. Most Parisians read the article and went about their day, but not Victor Lustig. To him, this wasn't just a headline. This was a golden ticket. Remember, Victor Lustig was no ordinary conman. He wasn't some back alley swindler or common pickpocket. No, he was an artist, a master of deception. A man who could sell you your own shoes and make you thank him for the deal. He had scammed millionaires, tricked law enforcement, and even duped Al Capone himself. Yes, the Al Capone. We'll get to that later in this episode. Now, Lustig was about to pull off the greatest illusion yet. He transformed himself into a high-ranking French official, complete with forged government papers and the confidence of a man born to rule. He summoned the city's top scrap metal dealers to a private, highly confidential meeting at one of Paris's most luxurious hotels. He greeted them with an air of authority, leaned in, and with the gravest of expressions, told them the shocking truth that the Eiffel Tower was for sale. It was too expensive to maintain, it was becoming an eyesore, and the government had made the difficult decision to sell it for scrap. But yes, this was a highly sensitive matter. The public would be outraged if they found out too soon. That's why this sale had to remain strictly secret. The businessman must have listened in stunned silence. Could this really be happening? Could they truly own a piece of France's most famous landmark? Then Lustig, being the showman he was, turned up the pressure. Only one dealer could get the contract, and he had chosen them, the most reputable, the most trustworthy. This was their once-in-a-lifetime chance to make history. Among them sat a desperate man. His name was André Poisson, a businessman desperate to carve out his place in the city's elite circle. He was new to Paris, ambitious but insecure, eager to prove himself among men who had been rich for generations. The troop of men with new money trying to buy status and respect among the creme of the society isn't exactly new. Mr. Poisson wasn't just buying metal, he was buying status. But you see, Lustig had a good sense of people like that, perceiving their desperation as a weakness. And then he tightened the nose on Mr. Poisson. Lustig called him aside and laid the classic advance fee forward scheme on him. Lustig informed Poisson that the government cannot be seen profiting from the sale of a monument as large as this, that there were many willing buyers, and the competition was stiff. However, a small personal gift could ensure that his bid was the winning one. And just like that, Poisson took the bait. First the bribe to grease the wheels of bureaucracy, and then the real payment, 70,000 francs, to claim ownership of the Eiffel Tower. Lustig took the money, shook hands, and like all conmen ever, vanished into thin air. By the time Poisson realized the truth, Lustig was already sipping exotic wine somewhere in Austria. The Eiffel Tower still stood as it always had, and Poisson, humiliated, too ashamed to go to the police. Lustig had pulled off the perfect crime. But here's where the story takes an even more unbelievable turn. Months later, Lustig checked the newspaper. Nothing. No scandal, no investigation. It was as though the scam never happened. And what did a man like Lustig do with that information? He decided to go back to Paris and sell the Eiffel Tower again. This time, however, he wasn't so lucky. He had gathered a new group of buyers. A fresh deal was in the works. But before he could close the deal, one man became suspicious and reported to authorities. The police were alerted, and Lustig, gone with the wind. He re-emerged at the other side of the Atlantic, the United States, where he could orchestrate his next masterpiece. In the late 20s, America went through a period of economic collapse, referred to as the Depression era. Naturally, a lot of crime lords emerged as a consequence of the hustling going on in the country. The most famous of these crime lords was a man called Al Capone. Al Capone needs very little introduction. He's the grand OG of all mob bosses America had ever seen, the most ruthless gangster America had ever seen, and the undisputed ruler of Chicago's underworld. His enemies vanished, his rivals ended up in the river, and if you crossed him, well, it quickly became a side note in a Wikipedia article about his reign. And yet, one man had the sheer nerve to corner Capone himself, not with guns, not with muscle, but with the serenading words of the chief corn artist himself. Years after pulling off his Eiffel Tower scam, Victor Lustig had now re-emerged in America, a trail of daredevil scams following him around. And now, he had set his sights on the most dangerous man in America. This is how he did it. Lustig approached Capone with an offer, a business opportunity, a crooked deal promising massive returns. All he needed was a little investment, just $50,000. A drop in the ocean for Capone, who was raking in over $100 million a year from his illicit empire. But Capone wasn't stupid. He didn't trust easily. If this was a scam, Lustig wouldn't just lose the deal, he'd lose his life. But here's where Lustig played his masterpiece. He took Capone's money and did absolutely nothing with it. No investment, no scam, just silence. For 2 months, the money sat untouched in a safe deposit box. No tricks, no lies, just a waiting game. And then, just as Capone's patience might have worn thin, Lustig returned, cash in hand. He fell on his knees, very apologetic, and claimed the deal fell through. And just like that, Capone saw something he rarely encountered in his world of crime and corruption: honesty. Lustig had planted the seed. Now it's time to harvest. With a look of desperation, he let out a heavy sigh. He explained that he had lost everything, that he doesn't even have enough to get by. He paused. Just enough silence, just enough weight in the air. Capone, blood-tasty kingpin, the man who had people gunned down in broad daylight, actually felt bad for Lustig. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a stack of cash, and handed him $5,000, which, adjusted for inflation, will amount to around $90,000 in today's dollars. It was the perfect con, one that didn't even look like a con. Capone never realized he had been played. No threats, no retribution, just a masterstroke of manipulation from the great swindler. In America, Lustig found himself a striving career as a con artist. I mean, he had outwitted Al Capone. What else could stop him? By the 1930s, Lustig had gone beyond one-off scams. He was no longer content with a few $1,000s here and there. He wanted something bigger. Victor Lustig had failed the richest men in America, but now he was about to con the entire US economy. Teaming up with a Nebraska pharmacist, William Watts, and a chemist, Tom Shaw, Lustig launched a massive counterfeiting operation. Lost and Shaw's engraved flawless plates, while Lustig masterminded a network of couriers, each blindly distributing the fake bills. For 5 years it worked. Month after month, thousands of Lustig's fake dollars flooded into the economy. They passed from hand to hand, spent in stores, deposited in banks, each one a tiny piece of an invincible empire, built on deception. But he was no longer a conman. He was a financial terrorist. Victor Lustig's latest con wasn't just about printing his own money. It was about making people believe they could print their own money. He called it the Romanian box, a polished mahogany contraption that supposedly duplicated cash, but only after 6 hours. Lustig rigged each demonstration by preloading a real bill, fooling victims into paying thousands for a worthless device. One Texas sheriff, realizing he had been duped, tracked Lustig to Chicago, but Lustig, ever the smooth talker, convinced him he was using the machine wrong, then refunded him in counterfeit bills. But there was one problem with this scheme. Lustig had become too successful. His counterfeit bills were everywhere, and when money starts appearing in places it shouldn't, the government takes notice. Federal agents were closing in. The greatest conman of time had played the system flawlessly. But now, the system was about to play him. Victor Lustig had deceived millionaires, outwitted law enforcement, and even conned Al Capone. But in the end, it wasn't the FBI that took him down, it was a woman scorned. Billie Mae, Lustig's longtime mistress, had tolerated his lies, his secrets, and even his dangerous lifestyle. But when she discovered he was cheating on her with a younger woman, she didn't just walk away. She made the call that sealed his fate. On May 10, 1935, federal agents stormed Lustig's hideout in New York, charged with counterfeiting. He played his final con, pretending to know nothing while throwing his partners under the bus. But one mistake undid him. a single key found in his pocket. Authorities traced it to a locker in the Times Square subway station. Inside, $51,000 in counterfeit cash, and the printing plate that had kept his empire running for years. The game was up, or so they thought. The night before his trial, Lustig staged a daring escape, faking illness and scaling the prison walls with a handmade rope. But after 21 days on the run, he was caught in Pittsburgh. Facing the inevitable, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years in Alcatraz, plus 5 more for his escape. The greatest conman of his time had finally run out of tricks. On March 9, 1947, Victor Lustig, the man who had fooled the rich, scammed the powerful, and even sold the Eiffel Tower, fell victim to something he couldn't con his way out of: death. Pneumonia struck, and 2 days later, at exactly 8:30 p.m., he took his final breath in the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. But even in death, Lustig remained a mystery. His death certificate bore the name Robert V. Miller, just one of his many aliases. No grand titles, no notorious reputation, just a simple listing: apprentice salesman, counterfeiter. A man who lived by deception was buried under a fake identity, and his final trick was carried to the grave. Yet, Lustig's legacy didn't die with him. He didn't just con the world, he wrote the playbook for those who would follow in his steps. His infamous 10 Commandments of con men became the gospel of deception, a masterclass in manipulation. This wasn't just a list, it was a blueprint for deception, a guide for charming, persuading, and ultimately taking what wasn't yours. Victor Lustig may have died behind bars, but his influence lived on. He didn't just con his generation, he shaped every scum artist that came after him. The ultimate hustler, the master illusionist. Like all larger-than-life figures who would have shaped the world in great and devious ways, Lustig had a lot of myths and legends about him, some of which may never be verified. However, there's no denying that he was a man who sold lies better than anyone before or since. If you love the thrill of unveiling real-life frauds, Ponzi scheme and financial crimes, hit the subscribe button now and turn on the notification bell, because we're just getting started. And here's a challenge for you. Drop the name of a scammer you think deserves your own episode. We'll be watching the comments, and your pick might just be next. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and see you in the next story.